Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Cup of Joy. I'm your host, Ariana Joy Christie, and I am so glad that you are here. This is a space to inspire, to learn, to grow, and to challenge. Get ready to fill your cup and spread a little joy along the way. Okay, Nita Sharda, registered dietitian, co-founder of Happy Healthy Eaters, and proud Punjabi mom with a passion for feeding kids and supporting positive meal experiences. Welcome to Your Cup of Joy.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I saw like the whole launch of this podcast, and I kind of feel like I've been a part of your journey in motherhood actually since your pregnancy with the twins. Like that's when I started following you.
Yeah, we've been connected for like years now. And I
Mhm,
think the way that we connected is so neat too. So, Nita and I are, I would say, friends. We've been
mhm,
working together since the twins, yeah, were babies. And
mhm.
I think because my whole like birth experience was quite traumatic and the twins were so premature, like I was a very anxious mom,
Yeah.
especially then. And so when I started thinking about introducing solids and I had been talking to my doctor, I was like, "Oh no, like here's a whole other thing I have to really think about." I was like charting all of the amount of liquid
Feed.
my kids were getting when they were babies and nursing and bottle feeding. And so I was like, "Oh my gosh, now I have to do this with like real foods too." And I was so nervous about just making sure that they didn't choke and they were getting the nutrients that they needed. And it just seemed
Mhm.
like this overwhelming topic. And there was so much information out there, and so much of it was conflicting. So, like,
Totally.
one person would say this, and another person would say this. And I
Mhm.
just was like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And because I'm the oldest sibling too, it was hard because I didn't watch any of my siblings do it with their kids. Like I don't
Mhm.
have cousins close in age to me. So it really was like just me and my husband who
Yep.
didn't have anybody to watch either. So we knew that we needed help and support.
Mhm.
And thankfully, I was so grateful to find you specifically and Happy Healthy Eaters to really help us. We did a course called Starting
So
Solids Confidently,
yeah.
and it helped us so much. So maybe to start, Nita, can you share with us where your passion for feeding kids came and this specialty in kids nutrition?
Yeah. So, like historically, I've predominantly worked exclusively in adult and actually
Huh.
senior or geriatric care. But my interest in feeding kids was actually inspired by birthing my own children. So it was when my oldest, who's now 7, started solids. I went to a really like great public health talk. It was actually like a prof of mine who led it, and it was good. It was useful information, things that I could apply at home, but at the same time, there was a bit of a disconnect because I still didn't feel like I had the knowledge and confidence to feed the cultural foods that I love and enjoy, and like kind of how to shift that and offer that to my baby. And that was so important for me because um, as an East Indian living in Canada, one of the easiest ways that I find connecting my kids to my culture is through food. So
Totally.
I don't always speak Punjabi to them, and so like for food, I wanted that to be like an integral part of their life. And so then I kind of noticed this disconnect. And then one day we were having me and my husband were sitting down eating like tandoori chicken, naan, and rice. And like my son had his like own little puree, which he was like enjoying. It was fine. But I could just see him eyeing and like lunging for my drumsticks. So I was like, let me give you some chicken. And in my head, I was like, am I allowed to do this? Like, but this feels so like intuitive, but is he going to choke? And so then that's when I decided to do a bit more research around baby led weaning, which was like, a newer movement, even 7 years ago we didn't have that research, and so that's what kind of inspired me to kind of dive headfirst into just the arena of feeding babies and toddlers as well. So long story short, I was inspired to do this by my own kids, and I think that's like the plight of motherhood, is like so much of the work that we do is inspired by our children. They kind of shine this lens on the things that we need to work on ourselves.
Totally. And I think that it's so cool that your culture plays a big role in that too.
Yeah.
Um, and something that you said that really I can relate to also is, am I allowed to do that? And something I've realized now as a mom of three is that they're my kids.
Yeah.
Like, just because there's somebody said one time, like, kids shouldn't have this. Things are changing all the time, and I've really learned that your intuition as a parent is very, very, very important, and sometimes more important than these quote rules that people put out there. Of course, some of the things are very, very important,
Of course.
but some of the guidelines and things just don't always fit our family
Mhm.
and who we are. So culture, um, beliefs, values, and I think those all play a big role. So it's so interesting to me and also exciting that culture played a big role in this for you. And for people who purchase your recipe book too, they
Mhm.
can see that your culture does play a role in that, and it's a great way to introduce new foods, uh, in a new way if you're not Punjabi or you're not from the
Mhm.
culture specific to the recipe that you have posted, but you guys do such a good job of creating, like, well-rounded recipes and recipes from all different cultures, so I
Mhm.
think that's so cool.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I think I always tell people, like, there's babies in all parts of the world, and they're eating their own food, like, babies in China eat Chinese food, like, babies in parts of Africa eat African food, so, like, why
Totally.
would they like, so then why would we just give a bland, like, pureed, I don't know, like, carrot or peas? Like, we can think a little bit beyond that. So yeah, no, that's such a good reminder.
Yeah, I love that, and,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't talk so much about my background often, but my dad is Punjabi. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was also a connection to you, I think, of
Mm,
finding foods that I love to eat that I
mm,
would never have thought to give to my kids,
totally.
but that were accessible to me. So I think that's
Yeah,
incredible and so fun for people to try new things and show their kids all different cultures through food.
yeah,
You also taught me so much about nutrition for kids, nutrients, debunking tons of myths that I thought or had been told my whole life that aren't necessarily true. And
mhm,
something that's always stuck with me is that I had this fixation on my kids need to get protein. How do I get protein into their diets? Like even as little, 4 to 6 month old babies.
yeah,
And you guys really taught me that actually the important nutrient that we should be focused on, especially for babies, is iron.
yes.
And I didn't really realize that importance. So, can you share with us the importance of iron in babies' diets and why that is?
Yeah, let's start with the why. So I think what's important to remember is that when your baby is born, there's a few things that sort of influence their iron status, but one of them is maternal. So the birth parent, and like how was their iron stores, and if they
Mm.
were adequate enough, then what happens is baby inherits some of that iron from mom,
Hmm.
and then when baby is born, they kind of like I like to think of like a bank. They have this bank of deposits of iron, and even the birth story can influence that too. Was there an opportunity for delayed cord clamping, and we know that there's like a nice rush of iron that kind of happens at the end. How is baby fed? But then what happens is like around that 6 month mark, that bank, the baby's been taking out like lots and lots of withdrawals. And so around 6, 7 months, that storage, that bank has been depleted, but now your baby is also going to go through so much like rapid growth and development between that 6 to 12 months that they need more iron for that red blood cell and for all that oxygen to go to their cells. So what ends up happening is it really, really skyrockets. So to put it into perspective, like my baby at 6 months needed more iron than my like 6'2", like 200 and something pound husband. And so iron is really important because of that growth and ultimately to support optimal brain development, provide baby with like the oxygen and energy they need to kind of learn and like make sense of this world that they're in. So yes, like protein is important. I don't want to disregard that, but the key nutrient that we want parents to focus on is iron.
Because you said, isn't it something like the babies need 11 times the amount of iron as
Yeah.
an adult?
Well, 1.4 times more, so 140% more, and then, like, they need about 11 milligrams is the recommended, like,
That's
intake. Yeah.
so wild to me. And
Mhm.
it's funny that you talk about, or cool, I guess, that you talk about how even the birth and pregnancy all
Mhm.
contributes to iron because since our twins were preemies, we were referred to a pediatrician for their first 2 years of life, and the only supplement they really needed to take besides vitamin D, which I feel like every baby needs,
Mhm.
was iron. So they
Yeah,
were on an iron supplement, and because there was no opportunity for delayed cord clamp because they were so premature and
yeah,
because they didn't get all the iron that they needed,
yeah,
obviously.
yeah, yeah.
So that's so interesting to me and so cool.
Mhm. Yeah,
I want to talk a little bit about how there has been such a change in nutrition for kids. I feel like when I started introducing solids, my mom was really involved in helping me raise my kids, especially in their first year of life. And she went off of things that she had learned. So, like things like protein, having purees, having baby cereal, like that should always be the first food, was always talked about. And even like early introduction to allergens has just become this big thing, but
mhm,
wasn't necessarily before. And
mhm.
so baby led versus purees. There are so many conflicting pieces of change in the realm of starting solids. So, what really is best? Why is there conflicting advice? And how does a new parent go about learning, I guess, and
Yeah.
choosing what to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think a part of the conflict or yeah, it's hard to find the right word, but I think
Yeah.
I think the big reason is like we always have on any given topic, we have people who are like really, really like kind of on that extreme polarizing end of like of each spectrum. And
Yeah.
so I think what Jess and I really try to encourage people to do is actually get a bit more comfortable with the gray, the nuance. And so our recommendation, and we talk a lot about this in our e-course, is you have to really assess your baby's like temperament. What is going to
Yeah.
work best for your baby
Mhm.
and for you, because at the dining table I'd much rather have a non-anxious presence from a parent, because if you're
Clearly.
anxious handing your baby a meatball, your kid is going to pick up on that. It's projected, and then they're not going to have that confidence because you're not there confident. So then I just
Mhm.
will tell these parents, you know what, I think like for the first few weeks let's stick to purees and we will get there. We have some time here to advance in textures. Whereas other times you have like parents who are like preparing all these purees and their kid wants nothing to do with it, and then cue the parent pivot and they have to offer these larger pieces of food. So I think again, you're going to learn a lot from your child. And
Mhm.
maybe the key word here is responsive feeding, which is like
Hmm.
something that we're talking about a lot more in the nutrition realm. Is we want parents to be responsive to their child, and recognizing too that feeding is an attachment ritual, right? This is the parent is in like a very specific leadership hierarchical role, and then you've got your baby, right? And so we want that to be positive, we want it to be secure, so your child can go out into the world exploring new tastes and flavors and textures. So really there's no best way to start, but if you have a little baby and you're listening to this, what I want you to do is like close your eyes and envision their first birthday. And basically, you're going to be sitting down together, having bite sized pieces of the same thing, and all the food is going to be soft. So, whether you started at puree or baby led weaning, all those babies are working towards that same end goal.
I love that. And it
Mhm.
is true, like something that I really appreciated because I was like an
Mhm.
anxiety ridden human being. Like I was not in a good place then, I think, because I was just nervous about everything to the
Yeah.
point where even like, I was so scared about choking that I would have Mike feed them. Like, if we were
Yeah.
doing anything that wasn't a puree, he was feeding them and I was leaving the room because I could not be around it for a period
Yeah.
of time. And it became this thing where I was like, how do I overcome this? How do I, go about this? And so, it was very difficult, but I think the thing that I really loved about our process of introducing solids to all 3 of our kids was that we kind of did that gray area. Like, I would watch these videos of
Those
people being like, "100 kids before 100" whatever it was, and
good
"This is
foods.
what you have to do, and you have to give this size of pieces," and I was like, "I'm gonna do, like, a couple purees that I feel comfortable with, and then once they're doing a little bit okay with that, then I'm gonna do something, like, quite soft, like a safe food that I feel good about," and we could kind of work our way through by doing a mixture of both.
Mhm.
And I think that release of the pressure of you have to do this was helpful to me, especially in my anxiety,
Yeah.
in just knowing that like my kid is eating. They're trying new tastes. They're trying I would puree only a little bit and have, like, some
Mhm.
texture in there, and there were different ways to go about
Yep.
introducing solids, and
Yeah.
so I
Yeah,
didn't feel
I
like I was
I
doing
think
anything wrong.
too, we often think it needs to be puree or, like, handheld foods, but
Yeah.
that's not true. We can and I actually find just like you, parents thrive in a mixed approach. You know, maybe we'll do baby led weaning in the morning, and then in the evening when baby's more tired and you're more tired, we're gonna do purees. Like,
Yeah.
I think you can make it work for yourself. And the key here is, you know, if you're starting with purees, we just want to see you progress in texture.
Mhm.
And if you can't and you're really struggling, then reaching out for some support, whether it is really crippling anxiety and you need to have that discussion with your care provider, or maybe you just need more hands on like coaching around like infant CPR and like understanding the difference between choking and gagging.
Yeah, and that was huge for us. We did an infant CPR course with
Mhm.
everybody in our family that was going to be feeding our children, and to me, that
Well,
just gave me so much peace of mind and really, I think, changed the game for me. And again, having that mixed approach because otherwise I would start to really, like, um, be so anxious leading up to feeding time or
yeah,
want to be, "Oh, I'll just wait till tomorrow." Like, "Oh, they don't need to eat solids
yeah.
today." And that's not good either, but
You're avoiding it. Yeah,
so avoidant.
yeah.
And so being able to just, give a puree was a little bit easier for me to work my way up,
And
which
give you the
worked.
confidence that you need to keep
Yeah,
going, right? Uh,
totally.
did you find that your kids each had a different eating personality, or were they all like I kind of think your boys were a bit more adventurous.
They
Like,
were
yeah.
so adventurous, and it's wild to me how it changes. So I feel like I fed them so well when they were like, tried all different textures and tastes, and I think, like, Axel always had food all over him. Oscar was definitely more, um
Like slow and steady?
yeah, and, like, not polite, but that's the word that comes to mind, where he didn't wanna make a mess, and when I think back to their play too, that was their personality in playing, not eating also. So, we'd put together a sensory bin and Axel would have it all over his entire body, but Oscar would be like, just touching it with like one finger. So it's quite funny how that translates to eating too. Like their personalities really do
Yeah,
shine.
yeah, yeah.
It's
And
so funny.
that's probably how they'll approach like food too, you know? Like think about them like when they're like 18 and trying like sushi and caviar and like, you know, you'll see one like diving right in, the other's just like, like what's this gonna feel like in my mouth?
Yeah, and I can see that even happening in them now that they're
Yeah.
3, Axel will eat anything, even if, like, he shouldn't eat it, and Oscar will if there's, like, a little, like, black mark on his fruit, he's like, I don't like that part."
Yeah.
So it's so funny how different it can be.
Yeah.
Um, I know there are lots of myths in starting solids, and we've talked a little bit about some of them,
Mhm.
but what are some of the biggest myths that you see in your practice for starting solids with kids?
Yeah, I mean, one that I'm learning about like this week because we've had a post that's kind of going viral is that your baby needs teeth in order to start like solid food, which is I thought we were over that people because like some kids don't get teeth until close to their first birthday. We're not going to be on like applesauce consistency leading up to that. So
Yeah.
I like to remind parents like dentition doesn't really like play a big role, at least in infancy, with the texture. Your baby has a really, really strong like gums and jaw and muscles, and they can like chomp down on, you know, on some textured food. So that was like a really like interesting one. And then another one that I've seen floating around a bit more recently is this idea that your baby can't digest wheat or like carbohydrates
Oh.
until a certain age because maybe there's some hoopla around the baby not having enzymes, which is also false. So if you see that,
Oh.
just like stay away with like a 10-foot pole. It's so inaccurate. And I think again, like just like what you said, it's just like perpetuating these fears around foodie about food and feeding, and it's just so unnecessary. So I really feel for parents because there's so much misinformation, and I think, you know, you and I both know misinformation spreads far, it
Mhm.
spreads wide and fast, you know? So
Totally.
if you are confused, that's why pages like Happy Healthy Eaters exist because we
Mhm.
we want just parents to feel relaxed and good about feeding.
Totally, and it's funny because my mom has said that to me before, like, with all of the kids, "Well, they don't have
Yeah,
teeth yet, I don't think they should eat
yeah.
that," and I'm like, "No, no, no," like, for anybody who is a breastfeeding mom who's ever been bit by their children without
Mhm.
teeth,
Yeah,
you
you know.
know that they can bite with their gums. So, I think that is, yeah, a huge myth, and it's easy to think, like, "Oh, you need teeth to," like, I understand why people would think that, but it's so good to know that you don't necessarily need that. When is your recommendation for children to start solids?
Mhm, around 6 months is kind of that sweet
That's what I thought.
spot. Some babies, may show those signs of readiness a little bit earlier, but what I tell parents is to, again, like, assess your baby. It's so easy to compare your baby to your friends or your
Mm,
neighbor's baby, but you need to really assess, like, is my baby sitting up? Do they have good head and neck control? Are they interested in food? Are they bringing
mhm.
objects to their mouth? And those are the things that will help. And certainly anywhere before 4 months is absolutely not recommended and can potentially be harmful as well. So I generally say like 6 months is a really nice sweet spot, and that's what the World Health Organization also recommends.
Amazing.
Hmm.
I wanna talk lunches because obviously September, this is like the first
Yeah.
week of school, it's a hot topic. But our twins just moved from CASA 1 to CASA 3 at their school, and part of that transition that I was not aware of until just a couple weeks ago is that I now have to pack them lunches.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So I was not prepared. I didn't have, like, time to think
We need
about
to
it
get
leading
you the
up.
Lunches for Littles e-guide.
I literally was like, "Oh my gosh, what do I do?"
Yeah.
And so I have found it a little bit difficult. I feel like I'm finding tips and tricks that work for me in my house now, in this first week of school. But can you share with us maybe some of your top tips and tricks for packing a nutritious but also delicious lunch for your kids?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, when it comes to lunches, when our kids are away from us and they're somewhere else, is make sure that the vast majority of the foods that you send are foods that your child typically accepts. This is like not the best environment to, send them a food that they usually reject and, is maybe going to upset them a little bit because
Totally.
again they're away from us and we play such an important role in helping our kids stay regulated. That being said, some kids do fairly well with like a kind of like a food they're learning to like because
Mm,
there's a lot of positive peer pressure. They're seeing their
mm,
peers eat these different foods as well. So I think for the most part, I encourage parents, send foods that your child typically accepts. And something that I'm doing, I have a child who's just starting full day kindergarten, is like every day. I let him, like, decide what kind of, like, extra, like, the packagey or treat food is that he wants,
mm.
and one of the things we decided is, like, we'd bake cookies together and he would take that,
Aw.
and so I think that'll remind him a little bit of home and just, like, a piece of me that's with him, so I think thinking a little bit not just about the nutrition, but about how you connect with your child through food can
Mm.
also be supportive. And then in our Lunches for Littles e-guide, we have like this great acronym. It's FFPP. So you want to send your child some food with um, fiber and fat because those help you stay really really full. um, Protein, which is also usually going to have your iron source in it, and then a couple pieces of produce, whether it's fruit or vegetables. And generally, like if you're following that formula, um, you're probably going to give them enough options, but enough to also just stay energized and satiated over the day.
I love that, and that's such an easy way to just think about it, make sure I've included one of each of those things. I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah.
Something that I have learned just yesterday that I'm now thinking about when packing lunches is that so Oscar is my picky kid.
Okay.
Axel eats everything, and Axel's a fast eater, so, like, when we have dinner together, like, he eats at, like, a normal pace, I would say. Oscar is slow, he's a social being, he's looking around, he's cautious, he's thinking about what he's eating, he's picky, so if it's one of those things that he decides today he doesn't like, even though he liked yesterday, he's really thinking that
Mhm.
through, and I think their lunch period and the time they get to eat isn't that long.
Mhm.
So the first day they brought their lunches home and he had not one bite of his actual lunch. He had eaten the little snacky things that I had packed, but his bento box he had not had one bite of. Um, And the next day he had 1 bite. And so I
Mhm.
asked him yesterday, like, because I packed very safe foods for him, things that he likes. We talked about his lunch. And I said to him, "Oscar, you didn't eat any of your lunch. How come?" And I think he had eaten like the goldfish or something, like the cracker. And he was like, "Oh, mommy, because the teacher said that it was time to go." And I
Mhm.
was like, "Oh my gosh, he ran out of time to
Yeah.
eat," because I
Yeah.
think he had had 1 bite of his little wrap.
Yeah.
And so what happens? What do you do for slow eaters? Like, how do I avoid this? Because now I'm thinking, like, what are fast foods for him to eat that are still,
Mm.
nutritious? Like, how do you go about that?
Couple ideas. I think some of it is trial and error. Like one is like you could have a conversation to see if you could start a little earlier or be given a couple extra minutes.
Mhm.
That might not work because if he sees the other kids rush out, he might just want to prioritize that. The
Yeah.
second is like you could just reduce the overall portion by 30 or 50%. So
Okay.
in your head, you're thinking, "Oh, I'm giving him less food." Well, no, because he'll get through the different options, right? And at least this way he's having variety, even though there's a reduced volume.
Hmm.
And for some kids, like seeing all that food, it's like, whoa, like mom wants me to eat all that. Like it just like gets interpreted as pressure. So you could try that. And then something that's worked for me with my oldest, who's a very busy body, he's just like a uniquely wired child, is we get a lot of his nourishment at school through beverages. So every day I send some form of beverage, whether it's like a smoothie, chocolate milk, or milk. He gets like nutrition from a beverage because he's just that kid who'd much rather like drink this back than to like sit and like eat and use all that coordination. Um, and in my position, like, I'm not worried about, like, this kid of mine because he's actually my adventurous eater. It's just at school and in that environment,
Mm.
he just he can't manage, like, all that food, and so for us, the smoothies seem to work really, really well or just any form of beverage.
Interesting. Do you have certain cups that you use? Because I'm like, how am I
Yeah, yeah,
packing a
yeah.
smoothie?
Yeah, so, there's these, like, I think they're called, squeezy snacker, which is, like, this kinda, like, pouch thingy, it's silicone, and so I put the smoothies in there,
Mm.
and then for the milk, what I do is I bought from Amazon like a really small tumbler, like a mug for coffee. So what I do is I just put it in there with like one ice cube, and then it stays like cold up until
Smart.
lunch. And like it's fairly leak proof, but I've just like really coached him to not like turn it upside down and jostle it a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the two things that seem to work for us. And I know in
Smart.
the US they have these like Tetra packs of milk, like cow's milk
Ah.
and chocolate milk. So I was recently at Target, so I snagged a bunch of them. But we don't have anyone here in Canada. I don't think that's like
Funny.
doing that. I used to see it, but I don't anymore.
This episode is brought to you by Happy Healthy Eaters. Happy Healthy Eaters helps parents feed babies and toddlers. You can save on all of their e-courses with code Ariana15. This includes their Starting Solids Confidently course, Feeding Toddlers Confidently, and their workshops. Visit happyhealthyeaters.com and use code Ariana15 to save. That's ARIANA15 to save. That's a really good idea with the smoothies, though. I might try
Yeah,
that because at home, that's a way that I get vegetables into like, Oscar will not eat a vegetable unless it
yeah,
is in something, and
yeah.
so that's a way that I do get it into his diet, but that is actually such a good idea because then it is a little bit easier and more accessible for them to eat at
Yeah,
school.
like they just like slurp it back, right? And then
Yeah,
I just feel like, okay, great. You got some carbs, some protein, some fat, like some hydration. Um,
totally.
and so I think again, like it might not be like, what you see like on Instagram, like the Japanese style, like bentos and like picture perfect, but does it work for your child? Is it meeting their needs? And those should be your guiding lights.
Mhm. Totally. I love that.
Mhm.
Um, Speaking about Oscar, picky eating.
Yeah.
This is a hot topic and a huge topic in our household because Oscar is literally the pickiest eater ever. And when we go back to saying, like, I gave a variety of foods when they were children,
Mhm.
both twins had the exact same thing fed to them every day for the beginning of their life. And one kid is just so adventurous, he will eat literally anything. And the other will eat crackers and cheese, and that is it. And we suffered from huge constipation issues with him. Like, it became, I was going to my doctor often about it We had to have x-rays. Like, I honestly thought he was gonna have to have surgery. It was so bad. And so, now we're on a good track with his digestion, thankfully,
Mhm.
and he's funny because every week he'll choose, like, a new fruit that he likes, and then he'll just eat that a bunch, and that's the only fruit that he wants, and then the next week it'll be something else, and it just kind of changes, and he has his kind of safe foods, but they change
Mhm.
sometimes too, and so I'm like, "What do we do?" Like, we've actually even been referred to an occupational therapist because they
Mhm.
think it's maybe sensory issues for
Mhm.
him. But here in Ontario, like, the wait list, I think, is, like, 8 months. So we've been waiting, I think, 6 months. Hopefully, we'll see somebody soon.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but why does this happen? How do I avoid it? He won't even eat pasta. Like,
Mhm.
he literally eats English muffins and crackers.
Yeah. So it happens for a variety of reasons. One of them is it's called food neophobia, which is just like fear of like unfamiliar, but also familiar foods. And
Mm.
we see this usually start to happen in toddlerhood around that 18-month mark, but it can happen as early as like that transitional period between like 9 and 12 months. And then we see this like selective eating or like quote unquote picky eating kind of continue on. And usually, like if parents are, like kind of doing things that are supportive, it usually like does taper off at around age 6. So
So
this
I've
is
got some time.
Yes, this is why I say, like, eating is parenting, right? Like,
Yes.
it is. But it happens for a variety of reasons. I mean, it could also be, like, partly related to the constipation because sometimes I don't know if you've ever been constipated, like, this is, like, an elusive part of my life. So, if I'm
Mm.
constipated, I have no appetite. It kills my appetite. And so if we don't have appetite, then we don't have that, like, innate drive to, like, explore food actually. So
True.
part of it
True.
is could be the constipation. The other part is he's a toddler, so he is craving like lots of autonomy and independence, and so kids can often like they just can't control a lot in their life because like we're the parents and we make those decisions. So it just feels like a really great way for them to exercise that sovereignty and bodily autonomy by just being like, nope, not going to eat that,
Yeah.
um, even though it might not make sense to us as caregivers.
Mhm.
And then, you mentioned the piece about the OT, and so certainly could be like a part of just a sensory difference, right? So some kids like maybe have a difficult time with certain tastes or textures or smells, and sometimes those assessments can give us so much information because if you're like, oh, okay, like it's mushy food, okay, great, let's like focus in on like some crunchy foods we could like help you become a bit more successful with. But my overarching like recommendation to parents is like you're not alone, and the best thing that you can do is to continue with like food exposures.
Okay.
Like parents come and they're like, oh, my kids don't eat any vegetables. And I'm like, oh, like, tell me about the veggies you're eating. And then they'll say, like, well, I gave up on it. Like, even I don't even eat the veggies anymore. And I'm like, no, like we need that modeling piece. And what we know from some of the long-term research is that when kids see mom and dad and their caregivers like enjoy and eat food, they eventually grow up to enjoy eating those foods as well.
Amazing. So continue exposure, don't stop.
Yeah, yeah, and exposure doesn't just have to be, like, making the food, it could be, like, getting him involved in food preparation, it could be,
Mm.
like, reading a story like, The Hungry Caterpillar, or I love,
Mm.
like, Bilal Loves Dal. It could be, even just, like, um, in their, like, um, kitchen, like, you might have, like, a toy kitchen area, like, that's food play, or, like, a sensory bin where the the ingredient, the base of it, instead of beads, maybe it's like puffed wheat or beans. Like this is all exposure and helping him to understand, like, okay, touching this, engaging with this actually feels safe for my body. And maybe
Mm.
one day when I'm ready, I will taste this food. And once I taste it, then maybe I will eat it. So it sort of starts in stages, but exposure can be a wide variety of things.
That's so interesting and
Mhm.
good to think about too, because I serve it to our family and I always try to encourage. And he does help with preparing. And I think that creates
Mhm.
some safety around, especially like asparagus, because he likes to hear the snap and he like
Yeah,
snaps
yeah.
it. So I think finding those things that he likes to do definitely
Well,
helpful.
get
But I've
him to
never
paint.
considered
um,
the sensory bin.
Yeah, get him to paint with the asparagus. Like, so use the tip as like a paintbrush and just like,
Good idea.
"Hey, let's make papa a picture," and, like, keep the pressure off. I mean, he's not supposed to eat that, right? But,
Yeah.
again, it's just engaging with it in a different way that's entirely play-based, and kids really, thrive in that type of
What a
environment
good
as well.
idea. I'm
Mhm,
definitely gonna try that. That's so interesting.
mhm.
Um, I've been seeing a lot online about how nutrition affects mood, energy levels, behavior. There are like big topics of like different food dyes and how they affect behavior. Um, how does nutrition affect a child's behavior
Yeah,
and mood?
yeah. So it does, right? Like, I know certainly for me, even as an adult, like, I'm not a pleasant person to be around if I'm really hungry, and I see this
Same.
even in my own kids, like, often when I pick them up from daycare or from school, they're so hungry and, they're not able to tell me that, but I can just tell because they're so irritable and
Yeah.
upset, and I'm like, "Wow, like, we just really need to get home, and I need to get you food." But I've now, like, mastered just bringing a couple snacks in the car, and that seems to really, like, tide them over. So absolutely, it does impact mood. I think we're learning a lot about also just how the environment and our gut impacts our mood. I think a lot of that research is really, really early. And you had asked kind of that question around food dyes, and there is, certainly something to be said about some population of children and adults who are impacted by food dyes, but it's not everybody.
Okay.
So I think it really just depends. And if parents are curious, like working with a dietitian or your provider is really helpful because you also don't want to be like eliminating a ton of foods and almost like creating a negative
Yeah.
um, association with food for your child. So I'd say,
Mhm.
before you eliminate a bunch of foods, like, work with someone to make sure you're also not missing out on those other key nutrients.
Interesting. So think about possibly adding nutrients versus trying to take things away.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. Um, so we're a family who tries to have dinner together at the table. I think that was something that was talked about in your course is modeling the behavior. So like eating the foods with your kids, eating the same foods as your kids. For me, it's like an emotional connection. I always grew up having dinner together, and that was the time we could talk about our day and how things went. Is there impact actually for nutrition of eating dinner together at the dinner table, and why is that encouraged?
Yeah, and there's so much. Like, we have seen in some studies that when you look at the families that are having family meals more often together, these kids typically have like higher intakes of key nutrients that they need for growth, like calcium and iron, because usually the meals is where you get that balance of like the several different food groups versus like snacks or grazing. Usually it's like a single item or maybe two foods.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's huge benefit in terms of just like nutrition, but even more so, so much benefit around like emotional regulation and instilling like family values and culture as well. So
Mhm.
huge benefit to family meals, and it's hard. I mean, you're in a household with two people who are working. You have three kids.
Yeah.
I'm in a similar situation. So, and then add on like activities. It's like a part-time job in the evening. I'm finding. Um,
Same.
so what I recommend families do is like don't put so much pressure on trying to have a family meal every single day. Look at your
Mhm.
calendar and just see what you can do. Do the best that you can do. And maybe it's like a couple breakfasts, maybe it's two dinners, and that's okay. And it might not be everyone in the family. Maybe it's three of you or two of you. But the idea is just making it a priority because I do think that more and more family meals are becoming kind of extinct, and I think that's just the system we live in. We have parents who might be working shift work or
Mhm.
yeah, long hours or feeling the need to take on another part-time job as well. So it is really tricky, but it's so important.
Yeah, it's difficult for sure, but I do love that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing, you
Mhm.
know? Sometimes my kids do eat in the living room, and that's because I have things that I have to get done, but other times we do really try to have that family dinner together, um,
And they probably
and I
love
love
it
it.
when you do eat in the living room. They probably like try different foods too.
That's the thing is, like, I think there is a balance to be had there of
Yeah.
having, opportunity for both and comfort, but also the comfort of family, and it's hard to manage, but Yeah, I like that it doesn't have to be, every day we're having dinner
Yeah,
together. I also was talking to a girlfriend today about the marathon of after school, dinner, trying to spend time together, and bedtime because we're making bedtimes earlier because the naps are shorter or not
mm,
happening at school. And so yeah, managing the expectations of all of that. I'm trying to, like, cook in big batches and have leftovers or things that are quick for the days that I'm working longer hours,
yeah,
to still be able to get that quality time together and a meal and bed in a good time.
mm,
It's
yeah,
very difficult, but I think, yeah, setting yourself up for success and also having more flexibility
yeah.
in not always having to sit down
Yeah,
altogether is
yeah. I
helpful.
I think, like, flexibility and lowering your expectations, right? I
Yes.
think on Pinterest and Instagram, we're attracted to these, like, beautiful, like, family meals and, like, with, like, 10 different options, but that's just, like, not realistic. We have to remember
Yeah.
that a lot of that is aspirational, and it's fine if you want to consume it, but if it's making you feel like really inferior about what you're bringing to the family table, it might be like a good time to just pause and
Mhm.
like just honor that you're doing the best that you can in the most demanding season of your life, right?
Literally. Speaking about like living room versus dinner table and all of that, I know there has been some research and some talk around the relationship between screen time and eating habits in kids.
Mhm.
And I wanted to get your take on that because some days I'm like, okay, I'm putting on a movie, you're eating here, and that's all I can do because it's necessity. Like
Yeah.
there's no time for anything else, or managing 3 children is hard to manage everybody's needs. So if one needs some more attention and the other is also needing that, then sometimes I need help, which sometimes is a screen.
Mhm. Yeah.
What is your take on this?
Yeah, it's really, like, nuanced. I think I always ask parents, like, what is the intent with the use of a screen? So are we putting, an iPad in front of our toddler to get them to eat? Because then what happens is it's
Mm,
just serving as a bit of a distraction and the child isn't really, like, mindful, and so they might be eating. So this is usually, like, the parent who's worried about their kid, and they're not eating anymore, or, like, as a tactic to get them to, like, stay at the table.
yeah,
Uh, so I think understanding your why. In some cases where I've had kids who definitely have learning differences or there's some sensory differences going on, they actually do really well with a screen and it can be very regulating for them and
hmm,
can actually help them overcome some fears around trying new and familiar food. So I think I always try to ask parents, like, why are we using the screen? How does your child cope and manage food without screens?
hmm,
And, like, is this helping, right? Like what is the long-term goal? Because, when your child is at school at lunchtime, that m that might not be available, and so we need to also just have tools so that your child can, like, be, comfortable around food and successful with eating, like, at birthday parties, at school, and, like, one day they're gonna have a job, and, like, you want them to just have those skills, so
yeah,
I'm very relaxed on it. Before I was a bit more like, "No, absolutely no screen when eating."
yeah,
But, yeah, that's really not fair, and it doesn't honor the fact that each child is just so unique and every family is so unique. I know for me, when we do, like, movies, like, I usually do, like, a really big snack board, and that's when I add in, like, a lot more of, like, the rejected foods, and, like, it's really interesting, like, because they tend to go for it a bit more often, so
yeah.
I just kind of take note of that, and I don't make any comments, but I just find it really interesting.
That is. And I think it's a good opportunity to have like this might be a safe and comfortable spot for them to be because they know that we're just relaxing and in a comfortable spot and there's
Yeah.
a bit of a distraction by the screen and maybe that is a good opportunity to offer new foods. So
Mhm,
that
mhm.
yeah, I kind of love that. We like you said, all kids are different. Our kids really thrive on routine, we've found. And
Yeah.
so, like, every Friday, we have pizza movie night, and so I
Yeah.
do a snack board with some pizza, and that's our time to, like, relax. As a parent, it also takes pressure. That's one night that I don't have to think about dinner. I
Yeah.
know I have some fruit I can cut up, I know I have some things I can put on that board, and I know that I can pick up a pizza for 10 bucks at the store on
Yeah.
my way home from work, and that's gonna be dinner. And so, I think for me, it's a benefit, and for them, it's their thing that they're excited for, and they know that that's the time that they get to watch TV.
Yeah.
And so, Yeah, we like to thrive on routine. That's not for everybody,
Yeah.
but for us, that works.
Ariana, they're gonna be talking about these Friday movie nights, like, when they're 20.
I hope so. I hope it creates, like, memories for
Yeah.
them, you know?
Yeah, I think that's beautiful.
And
Yeah,
for me, it's special.
yeah.
Yeah, it is really nice. 2 things I think can impact nutrition in kids that are very predominant in my mind is time and money. Sometimes healthy foods take a longer time to prepare, or we think in our minds, if we want to provide a balanced diet, I need this much time to cook it and prepare it.
Mhm.
And it can be difficult. And sometimes it's just easier to open up like a pack of Ritz Bits or Goldfish that's already pre portioned and just call it a day. Like, I understand that. Other times, nutritious foods that my kids like cost a lot of money. Like, to buy a flat of mangoes at Costco is over $20 now.
Yeah.
It's wild to me. But that's, a safe food for Oscar right now. It's his fruit that he's thriving on. So I love that Happy Healthy Eaters considers both time and money. In your recipes, they say how much time it takes to make. Um, a lot of the time you're talking about accessible foods, things that
Mhm.
are culturally appropriate, but also things that are nutrient dense and budget friendly. What are some time and money saving tricks that you've been able to provide for your kids to have a nutritious diet?
Yeah, I think one of the things with the rising cost of food is like just thinking about your basics, like even the freezer section now, right? So, like peas are incredibly nutritious. There's a really good chance that they're Canadian. They're full
Mhm,
of like protein, there's some iron and carbohydrate in there and fiber. So, taking advantage of like frozen produce and berries, like I can do so much with frozen berries.
mhm.
Um, and actually think I get more use out of them than sometimes my fresh berries because,
Same.
like, in a couple of days, they often, like, are mushy or, moldy, actually.
Moldy. Yeah.
And so that's, like, one suggestion is, like, getting parents to lean into frozen, and also canned. I think that there's a lot of fear-mongering around, like, canned foods, but they're actually
Mm.
nutritious, and both frozen and canned produce, the produce is harvested when it's most ripe, right? So it's full of nutrition. And then in terms of things like eggs, eggs, like you can get at Costco like a lot of eggs for, a fairly like decent price. And so like the other benefit is like eggs, you can do so much with them from like frittatas to baking with them, egg muffins, like omelets. So they're very, very versatile.
Mhm.
And then even other proteins like canned fish, like tuna, salmon, like these are all really, really great and nutritious foods that we can offer. So I think again, like healthy isn't necessarily like the elitist, like expensive, like organic food. It could just be like your 99-cent like can of peas as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting to note because I do use a lot of frozen berries because I just find
Mhm.
they get moldy in one day, and I'll, like, splurge and be like, "Oh, I'm gonna buy a carton of raspberries," and
Yeah.
then you eat 2 of them and they're moldy.
Yeah, and
It's so
I've seen
wild.
you're really interested in sourdough, but, like, wheat, like, Canadian wheat is a really great source of a lot of, like, minerals and protein and energy, like
Mhm,
carbohydrates, so I think sometimes we forget, like, something like our bag of flour is actually, like, full of nutrition, quinoa, like pastas, these are all just wonderful foods that we can offer that actually aren't going to break your bank. Another good one is oatmeal, like
mhm.
I can get like a kilo of oatmeal for not a lot of money, and that thing will last me 6 months,
Yeah,
right?
totally, it does last a long time. I also have learned from you guys and when we started solids with our kids to add nutritious things that are easy to add.
Mhm.
So, I was concerned about fiber in Oscar's diet, obviously, because of his constipation, and, um like some a safe food for him is French toast, but I'll add some flax seed into it. I will do a little bit of vanilla instead of sugar, and then he's getting that egg without actually
Yeah,
eating eggs because he won't eat
won't
eggs. So it's a source of protein, it's a source of
yeah,
fiber, it's a carbohydrate, and I think those are really great ways to have nutritious food that is still a safe and comfortable food for your kid
yeah.
too.
You should send that for his lunch one day. You
I
just put
Yeah, it's in his lunch today.
in a thermos. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
because
cool.
I also just make a big batch. So, like, on Sunday night, I'll go out to our little blacktop, I'll make, like, an entire loaf of French toast, and then I have it for the week for breakfasts and for lunches, whatever they choose.
That's awesome.
So, I really like that I can do that ahead of time. It saves the time, but also it's a cost-effective
Yeah.
food
Have you
too.
tried it with raisin bread yet?
He doesn't like raisins.
Oh,
Axel
okay.
crushes raisins. Oscar can't.
Okay.
It's so wild to me.
You
Even
have to
the
try
language we use
it.
changes their mind too, though,
Yeah.
because like mango, for instance, like he wouldn't eat mango. Someone told me mango is really good for constipation. I was like, I need him to eat this. I started calling it candy. Now he loves mango. Isn't that silly? Like the language we use has so much impact on our kids. It's what dates, like my kids think dates are candy.
Yeah, that's so funny.
It's amazing. Um, so I can't let you leave without talking a little bit about self-care because that is the main focus of why this podcast came to be. It's that, life is busy, nutrition is all consuming, it's all day, every day for your kids. Um, and creating time to practice self care can be so difficult or non existent. It can just be easy to, for me, it's the first thing that goes. If I have a busy week, that's not the priority. How does self care fall into your line of work and as a mother and business owner?
That is like such a hard question, and probably because it's September, so I feel like again,
Yeah.
like I haven't prioritized my own self care. But
Mhm.
I think one of the things that I appreciate the most about this life that I've intentionally kind of created is my work is like fairly flexible. So when I work in private practice as a clinician, I try not to see anyone, until like 10 in the morning. And so I love that I've built this business and this work around, yeah, the family life that I want to create, and just like not feeling like so rushed every morning. I hated that when I was working in more employed work. I know not
Mhm.
everyone has that opportunity, but I know I'm certainly grateful for that. And then one of the things that I really prioritize for my own self care is sleep.
Amazing.
Yeah, it doesn't always, like, work out. Sleep has always been, like, a hard and elusive part of my life since having kids,
Mhm.
so I've had to really work hard at getting rest and getting good rest, but,
Yeah.
like, I just know, like, okay, like, it doesn't matter what else is going on, if I really need sleep, I'm probably gonna be much better off getting that rest than, just trying to, like, keep up with the go, go, go.
I love that, and I think that it impacts every other part of our day too
Yeah.
when we're well rested, and so that is so important.
Yeah, I mean, moms, like, I find we're so obsessed with our kids' sleep that actually
Literally.
we don't think about our own sleep. Yeah,
It's so true, and then because I'm trying to get all the things done once they're asleep that I don't wanna take away from the time with them when they're awake, then
yeah,
it becomes so difficult to yeah, to take care of our own sleep
yeah,
schedule.
yeah.
So to end, I always end with some rapid fire questions. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so one food that you think every child should try at least once.
Oh,
I'm gonna make these difficult for
mango.
you.
Yeah, yeah, mango. Mango's great. We've been
Hey,
talking about mango.
there you go. I love. Favorite healthy treat for kids?
Um, favorite healthy treat? I think, well, that one's tricky because I think, like, they're 2 different things, but I don't know, let's just pick a piece of toast.
There you go, because it's versatile. You can do anything
Yeah,
with it.
you can do whatever you want with it.
Love. Your go-to recipe for busy weeknights?
Breakfast for dinner, so,
Love.
like sandwiches, yeah.
And it is fast and everybody loves it.
Yeah.
I might do that this
Yeah,
week.
I'm also notorious for doing, like, cereal, like, boxed cereal for dinner some
So good.
days.
Sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
And coffee or tea?
Oh, tea. Yeah,
Ah,
chai.
amazing. The best. Well, Nita, thank you so, so much. We've given so much information, I think. And thank you for sharing your experience. Now, if people want to find you and connect with you and learn more about what you're providing and maybe starting solids confidently, because that, of course, changed my life for my kids, where
Mhm.
can people find you?
Yeah, you can find us at Happy Healthy Eaters, and then if you want to follow along with kind of my journey, and I share a little bit of different content with my kids who are not babies anymore, you can follow me at Nita_Sharda on Instagram as well.
Perfect. And we'll connect those in the show notes too. Well,
Okay.
thank you so, so
Oh, you're
much.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Your Cup of Joy. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. And if this episode resonated with you, or if you've been loving this show, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you are listening. Your support helps the podcast grow, it helps it reach more people, and it means the absolute world to me. So keep filling your cup with joy, and I will see you next week.